Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Sherry West, and I'm the founder and CEO of Live Girl. And I am honored to welcome you here today to our Listen, Learn, Act conversation series. This is our third episode, and the theme today is on the impact of microaggressions. So at Live Girl, our mission is to build confident, inclusive leaders who embrace diversity and make positive change. The Listen, Learn, Act conversation series has been thoughtfully designed to engage youth and their parents in racial justice advocacy. In order to achieve racial justice, we must learn, unlearn, and listen to and amplify the voices of color and experience. And our objective today is simply to have a meaningful conversation that leaves you with a clear call to action and to be a part of the solution. So today, I'm honored to introduce our keynote speaker and also our panelists. First, our talented keynote speaker is Alexandra Terry. She's originally from New Canaan, Connecticut, and she's a professional ballet dancer. She joined Ballet West's second company in 2016, where she performed, among other roles, Beauty in Beauty and the Beast, and also Aurora in Sleeping Beauty. She's also danced many corps de ballet roles in Swan Lake, Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, The Nutcracker, and George Balanchine's Jewels. Alexandra also had the honor of performing The Nutcracker with Ballet West at the Kennedy Center. And she spent 2 summers training at Jacob's Pillow and was recently named one of Dance Spirit Magazine's up-and-coming Black ballerinas to watch. So what an honor, and welcome, Alexandra.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
So also joining us today for our discussion is our panel of Gen Z leaders. And I'll introduce each of them, and they will be engaging in the conversation and asking Alex some questions later. First, we have Abnerline Macenat, a rising high school senior. Actually, I can just say that you're a high school senior. It's not far away.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Abnerline Macenat. Can you guys hear me clearly? Great.
Yes.
Okay. I'm a rising senior, as Sherry just said, at J.M. Wright Technical High School in Stamford, Connecticut, and I'm happy to be here.
Next, we have Kellie Taylor, who is a college sophomore.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kellie Taylor. I'm a sophomore at Housatonic Community College. My major is Computer Information Systems, and I'm so grateful to be here with you ladies.
And finally, we have Tiara Starks, a college junior.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tiara Starks. I am a rising junior at the University of New Haven. I'm studying communications and minoring in business management. I'm so happy to have been invited to be a panelist today.
And I'm happy to report that all 3 of these talented young women were part of our She Works program this summer, our career readiness program. So let's get started. So Alexandra, again, I'm so honored to be connected with you. Thanks to Amy Rockland. And really I reached out because Amy shared a very powerful story that you had posted on your Instagram, a personal story about growing up in a predominantly white town. And I want to hand it over to you kind of to tell us a little bit about your background, growing up in that town, and what inspired you to go become a professional ballerina.
Yeah, so I grew up in New Canaan. I started dancing when I was 3 years old. My mom kind of put me in ballet classes by accident. She got shut out of a painting class, and there was a ballet class at the same time. It was sometimes difficult being, through elementary school, I was the only Black girl in my grade. Well, actually, Black student in my grade. I remember at one time there was one Black student 2 years younger than me, and our science lab teacher would always call me by her name, and I couldn't figure it out for the longest time. And I was like, okay, I finally saw this girl, and I was like, oh, this is why I'm being called this name, even though she's 2 grades younger than me. And there, how many kids in my class with like brown hair who he doesn't get mixed up? I kind of, put 2 and 2 together. And I was like, that's not right. Even though I was like in, I think, 3rd grade at the time.
And so now, but tell us about ballet. So you continued from New Canaan. I know that in your early years, you were driving over an hour into the city for your ballet training. And then you went west from there. Tell us a little bit more about your journey. And while you do that, we're actually going to share some of your Instagram photos, which are extraordinary. and we'll really, really give everyone a visual of what you do.
Yeah, I started dancing at 3, and then at age 13, I got into Joffrey Ballet School in New York City. So I started commuting after school. I get on the train at 2:27, and school got out at 2:05. And then I'd get out of class at like 8 o'clock, and I'd jump on an 8:30 train and come home, do my homework on the train. And then my sophomore year of high school, I got into a ballet program that was during the day, normally starting at 10 o'clock in the morning or at noon. So I had to start doing online school because the high school didn't have any like flexible programs. And then after that, I got into San Francisco Ballet School, which was a school that I really wanted to get into, and I got into the scholarship, a merit scholarship. So I attended there for a year. And then I got injured while I was there, came back to New York, trained with some of my ballet idols, and then got my job at Ballet West, where I was there for 3 years.
These photos are magnificent. So I'm glad everyone has the opportunity to see these photos. But so today's topic is on microaggressions, and I want to ask Alex for you to educate us all on microaggressions and the impact. But before I do that, I actually want to share some data because the Gallup poll recently did a study on microaggressions, and I would just want everyone to see the results here. But the bottom line is that 32% of Black African-American adults say that people have acted as if they were better than you. 1 in 4 say people have acted as if they thought you were not smart. And about 1 in 5 report being treated with less courtesy and respect than others. So I think this data is really powerful and gives us kind of a good backdrop to our conversation. But I want to turn it over to you, Alex, just to kind of educate us on microaggressions, and even if you can share any personal examples so that we can all fully understand the negative effects of microaggressions.
Yeah, so I have a lot of examples, but they're, you know, small acts or kind of sayings that are slightly offensive. It's not like, you know, anyone's saying racial slurs to you or acting with violence. It's small things, but they definitely affect you. Like, I remember my family and I were coming back from vacation in Florida, and my brother saw a kid in the airport, and his mom was like, "Wait, but how do you know him?" about my brother, and she couldn't believe that we were from New Canaan and we went to the same school. She just didn't understand. It took her like 5 minutes to understand that, yeah, we also lived in New Canaan. Or I've done, you know, I'll meet like friends' parents, and they'll say, "Oh, you're so articulate," or "You're so well spoken," because they believe that if you're Black, you have to sound a certain way and look a certain way. Or if I'm on the street, like walking downtown in New Canaan, sometimes women will pull their purses away, like I'm gonna steal them. So it's like certain things like that. And it affects you. You're like, why are they acting like this? You don't even know me, or you just met me. Why do you have these assumptions about me?
And in fact, you shared a personal story on your Instagram that when you were younger, girls on one of your teams nicknamed you Pumpernickel. Can you kind of talk about that experience?
Yeah, so in my soccer team in third grade, some girls decided to call me Pumpernickel, and I totally didn't get it. And I told my mom when I got in the car, and she was like, "No." She was like, "Don't let them call you that." And then we went to the store like a couple days later, and I saw it was like 1 loaf of pumpernickel bread and the rest of it was white bread. And I was like, "Oh, that's me. I'm the brown loaf of bread in the white bread world."
You know, thank you for sharing that. And I think this is so important, such an important topic, because obviously the flashpoint on the national scale is the police brutality. But for many Black Americans, just this everyday mistreatment and discrimination is, and it's subtler, but it is what is so harmful and what is so troubling and exhausting in our culture. So I think it's important that we have this conversation. So Are you seeing, amidst this national conversation of race and equality, are you seeing more of a calling out and accountability for microaggressions?
Yeah, I think some people are becoming more aware of them, but there's also the problem where it's not pointedly aggressive, so people don't always believe that they cause trauma, which is a whole other issue. But I do think that people are trying to learn and trying to understand, and hopefully they will. You know, things will be a little better.
And so, what's your recommendation as a white person or a person that wants to be a good ally? Like, how do you be more mindful? How do you apologize if someone is calling out that you've committed a microaggression? How do you apologize? How do you make amends? Like, how do you be a good ally in this space?
Yeah, I actually had a situation with one of my best friends who I also worked with. We were in rehearsal and it's like union regulated 5, so you have a 5-minute block off every hour. And she said something during a 5, and I was like, "You can't say that. Like, that wasn't okay. We'll talk about it later." And she was like, "I wasn't trying to be like racist. Like that wasn't bad. Like all this stuff." And then I was like, "Okay, we'll talk later." And then I went back to my apartment, and then she FaceTimed me, and she was like, "I feel really bad because you were trying to let me know that something was okay, and I got so something wasn't okay, and I got so wrapped up in myself that I didn't take the time to listen to you." So I think that it's important, if someone does tell you that, you know, something's not okay, you listen to them. Don't get defensive about, you know, saying something that's not okay. Really take the time to listen to them, because I think most of the time, if someone does stop you and tell you that they feel that you treated them wrongly, they care about you. Otherwise, you know, if it's a random stranger, I'm going to let it go. But I would say, you know, this person is involved, feels deeply about your friendship. They're, you know, deeply involved in the friendship, and they wouldn't want it to go south because you've said something. So really take the time to listen to them and understand, and then maybe, I know there are a lot of resources on Google and Instagram, so even afterwards you could look things up. And then also, if you hear, you know, if you're white and you hear someone else white saying something rude, you know, to someone black, step in and say, you know, that's not okay, because it's hard for, I think every black person would say, if you're being offended, it's hard for you to step back and not get like emotional, because you have to take the role of being an educator to tell someone that what they're saying isn't okay. So if you see something, say something, and don't wait until after the fact and then text the person and say, "Oh, I heard what so-and-so said, that's not okay."
I think that's powerful advice, and it reminds me, Brene Brown recently said, you know, we're here not to be right, but to get it right, and that we all need to be open and learning and unlearning as we go forward. So thank you for sharing that advice. And I'd like to pull in the panel at this point, and one, just to see if they have any personal stories that they would like to share about microaggressions, and then also to join in and ask Alexandra your question. I think each of you have one question prepared. And so we'll start with Kellie.
So for me personally, I am a computer STEM girl. So I tried this aviation program, and I was the only African-American and only female in a group of 20 Caucasian boys, young high school boys. And so that's already intimidating, it's already scary, you're by yourself. Not only am I representing for the African-Americans, I'm also representing for the females as well in an aviation program that's dominated by white males. I told the boys in our team that I want to do the coding, that's what I'm passionate about. And they were like, "Oh, okay, yeah, you can do coding." But when it came to the coding part, they did it without me. And I told them, I said, you know, this is what I really want to do. And it wasn't for me actually standing up for myself and just saying like, hey, like, let's all work together. We're a team. I'm here for you. There's no one's bigger than the other person. Let's work together. Let's see what we can do. And it wasn't for that moment or that lesson to know that my voice mattered, even if I am the only female, or even if I'm the only African-American. I had to also represent for the females and African-American. I had to show that I am worthy for this position, and that's what I had to do.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Kelly. And I'm just seeing that I think we lost Alexandra's speed. So hopefully Allison can reach out to her and get her back onto the Zoom. So while we're waiting for her to rejoin, why don't we move, and so hold your question, Kelly, and we'll move to Tiara to see, Tiara, if you have any personal stories to share on microaggressions, again, so that we can all understand the hurtful impact.
Yeah, it's funny because I kind of grew up moving around to a lot of different houses, different schools, so I was able to get kind of different experiences from just growing up. So currently I live in Riverside, which is a neighborhood of Greenwich. There's like a stigma kind of of Greenwich, like when I was living in Stanford, people would make fun of people in Greenwich and like, oh, like they're the rich, snooty people, blah, blah, blah. I moved here and initially I didn't really get whiff of that. I just kind of treated it as a new town I moved into. And then there was an incident, not necessarily like, it wasn't like a big incident, but me and my friend who worked on the avenue, we were in a store and one of the ladies that worked there kind of gave us like a look that obviously you can kind of assume what it was directed towards both of us. It was kind of upsetting because, again, like as someone who's lived in this area in Fairfield County, there's a lot of privilege that you see and that you like kind of experience. Even like anybody who's Black who lives in Fairfield County kind of knows that like you're kind of assumed to act a certain way anyway. So it was just kind of upsetting to see in a worker in a store just kind of view us in that way. And just, I guess, other experiences that I've had, they've all kind of built up into my mindset that like, even though someone views you that way, it doesn't necessarily take away from like how you should like act, if that makes any sense. Like I act the way I do. This is just how I grew up. This is just who I've been around. I'm not acting a certain way just in spite of what someone else says. So ideally, a lot of the microaggressions I kind of just shrug off, and I kind of built up that immunity over the years, and it's something that I know a lot of people have struggles with. But yeah, that's just kind of how I kind of deal with a lot of things. I just kind of shrug them off, but I definitely can see how it can hurt really badly when you're younger. So yeah, that's just kind of my experience with microaggressions.
Thank you, Tiara, for sharing that. And also, it's a good time to remind everyone that self-care is extremely important, especially as you're processing through and working through some of these the racial justice. So please take care of yourself, Tiara, and for all of our other young women out there, the same. Meditate, do some yoga, go for a walk in nature. And hold your question as well, and we will move on to Abnerline.
Hi, everyone. Well, for me, I think one of the microaggressions that I've encountered was before quarantine, before Corona, I was in an organization that helped with college preparation, college prep, and I had a coach that would help me along with my goals. And she asked me one of the things that, what were my short-term goals in the future. And I told her that I was applying for this internship. Not She Works, a different internship, and the Bank of America Student Leaders internship. And as I was telling her about the program, she told me that it was a competitive program in a way that made me feel like I wasn't good enough to apply for it. And she also told me that I should look for something else to do because of the competitiveness of the program. And I just felt as if I didn't really realize what she said until after I got home and I sat down and I thought about it. And I thought to myself, would she have said the same thing to me if I was a white student? Would she have approached me the way she did if I was a white student? And it really got to me. And it was something that honestly just, I've realized that a lot of things that people say with their words have a lot of impact. And sometimes they don't realize it. And it's something that I've gone through a lot through school, people telling me that I speak too white or I sound too white or why are you using such big words? And it's really just disheartening to hear when people talk to you in a certain way. And I think it's just time for people to really understand that it's microaggressions are not about how you feel. It's about how you're, presenting yourself to someone, how you're talking to someone. And it's important not to be defensive about it and really listen to the person on the other side, because the words you have impact, and they can hurt a lot. And it can tear somebody's emotional, self-esteem. It's something that's people think about on a daily. As a Black woman, I think about it all the time. There was a time when I was in middle school, my gym teacher pulled me aside and asked me if I was in a gang, because I had a picture of a crown on my pencil case. And he told me that was a crown that was associated with a gang. And he pulled me aside and asked me if I was in a gang. And I, as a 7th grader in middle school, I had no idea about any type of gangs, no affiliations. And, thinking back, growing up and thinking back to the times where I've been encountered with these questions and conversations, it's just like, wow, this really happened to me. And I can't believe that somebody, said that to me. It's really it's hard. And I'm definitely willing to help people understand microaggressions, because some people honestly have no clue. And what they say, even if their intentions, I think it's important to differentiate between intentions and actions. You might not have the intention to be racist, but the things that you say are racist, and it's important for you to realize that. And I think just having these conversations like today, having these conversations, just really talking about and just sharing experiences is just something that's really important. And I hopefully hope that it, opens some perspectives into some of the things, and you think about what you're going to say to everyone, not just, Black people, Hispanic people, people of color in general. And just think about what you're going to say, have empathy, and just ask questions. That's the only way you're going to learn. If you ask questions, just make sure you're asking respectfully. And we have to move on. We're here to get it right, not to be right. So
thank you, Abnerline. And so we are having some technical difficulty with getting Alexandra back on Zoom, but lucky for us, on the call is Dr. Vida Samuel, who is a women's studies scholar and a professor at the University of Connecticut in Stamford. She is also a Live Girl board member. And I just texted her and said, can we please promote you to panelists so we can gain your perspective as well? So thank you for not expecting to be on screen, but being here for us, Dr. Samuel. You're always here for us. You're such a huge champion for girls and women and for all of our work. So I would just maybe ask you to kind of have your perspective on reflecting on what each of these young women just shared, these very personal stories of the microaggressions that they've experienced, and the hurt and the trauma, and kind of where do we go from here? Dr. Samuel, I'd love your perspective on that.
Sherry, thank you so much for including me in this. It's always a pleasure to be part of everything that our young ladies are doing. Microaggressions are one of those things that sometimes you don't see it coming, but when it does, it's completely jarring, and it destroys the soul in a way that we don't tend to understand. And it takes us a while to process that that's exactly what happened. And as I listened to Abnerline and Tiara and Kellie talk about their own experiences, and even Alexandra before she was cut off, what I thought about the most was, this is really the kind of trauma with which my students come into my class. And as a transnational, at the beginning of this series, I had a wonderful conversation. We talked about the idea of being transnational versus being a Black US citizen as opposed to being a Black transnational. And one of the things that, as Alexandra said, is that we're often held to a standard that is below the standard of others. And I'm talking about racial others, cultural others. It's almost as if we're expected to be speaking a different language altogether that is not even understandable. And part of reacting to the microaggressions is that, for ourselves, is ensuring that we actually don't react to it in that moment, because again, this is something that has to be processed. We typically don't see it coming, and when it does, it's traumatizing. What I would say to, I think each one of us, right? Because women in general can be traumatized by some sort of a microaggression based on comments that are made on our bodies, based on comments that are made on the way we look, the way we should look, what we're wearing. I would say equally so for race, that while we pay attention to those things, Kellie, I love the way you actually spoke for yourself about that project. And I think that's incredibly important. It becomes equally important to continue to do so as you get older, right?
Thank you, Dr. Samuel. And I agree. I think one of the leadership skills that we teach girls at Live Girl is to respond rather than react to any situation. And the difference, of course, being that a reaction can be something that isn't well thought through and can be hurtful in the moment, but a response is something more thoughtful. And so I think that's really good advice. And of course, we're always teaching young women to advocate for themselves and stand up for themselves. And the time is now that we're all doing that we're all educating ourselves and rising up to be better. So thank you for that. So I do want to mention that on our website that we have developed a compilation of resources on microaggressions and other anti-racism resources, and the link is still here in the chat. So I just want to offer that out as a resource for folks. And I'll just give our panelists the opportunity to ask their question that they had planned. If you want to go ahead and ask that question for Dr. Samuel, we can continue the conversation that way. So we'll start again with Tiara.
Hi, my question was geared more, I'm gonna try to reword it because with Alexandra, I know she works in like entertainment and that's what I wanna kind of go into, but I was just gonna ask basically like what she's noticed or what you've noticed maybe in like different industries and how they're trying to push like diversity and inclusion initiatives like within their companies, and just kind of your observations on that and like what you think needs to be improved or like what companies are like doing like right, and like just what you think about it.
That's actually a really good question, and it's a very universal question, because I can tell you in academia, we have done nothing but talked about diversity and inclusion. I am so sick of that term because it just doesn't have a genuine feel, right? Mm-hmm. All faculty must do some sort of training, but the training generally includes something that we do for about 2 hours, right? It's non-interactive. It is just a website. It's a program on a website. And then we have been blessed as competent in this, right? Even as a woman of color, I will say that I don't oftentimes feel as if I am culturally competent. So can you just imagine what you would be feeling at this stage of your life, going into a company that says, yes, we actually, we are very clear about our what we do in terms of diversity and inclusion, but when you look at what is really planned out, it doesn't seem to fit what you expect or what you might expect. So my suggestion to you is that if you go into an organization, you know what the commitment to diversity and inclusion is, or they might have a different name for it. In the 1990s, it was diversity, right? In the 1990s, we're also talking about health disparities in a way that only included people of color, but they did absolutely not. The American Public Health Association, I felt, didn't do anything significant about that. But I will say that companies are really good at having great diversity statements, but you don't know if they fit into what your idea of diversity and inclusion is until, of course, you have the experience there. And my recommendation to you is that if you're joining a company, particularly in entertainment, that you believe has this, essentially their mission or the commitment to that is very similar to your own, keep an eye on that. Mm-hmm. Take them to task on it when you find that this isn't happening, or when your colleagues aren't behaving in the way that they should, that actually matches the mission of this company. And I will say that, again, we were doing this in academia right now. I always thought that we would have been the first group of people as academics to be at the front of this, because we're doing a lot of research, right, on race and inclusion. And I don't think we've done a really good job of it.
I agree. Well said.
Thank you.
So we'll go with your question, Kellie.
So I love Abernethy's answer from earlier, and it actually kind of brought a flashback to me. When I was going through the college process when I was in high school, I went to my guidance counselor and I wanted to go to this particular college. And my guidance counselor kind of nicely laughed it off. She was like, well, you'll never get in there. And I said, well, why not? She's like, because you're not that certain race. And I just let her keep talking. And she was like, you know, you'll never fit in there. You'll never get in there. So I actually let that really discourage me. And so what do you do when you're feeling too overly sensitive, or you feel like that person, it's just that weird feeling like you just don't know how to handle it, or how that person responded to you? How do you deal with that?
And I imagine that your guidance counsel would have been responsible for also writing a letter of recommendation for you. So
Yes.
at this point, you're asking this, you are having a conversation with somebody in a position of power. And if you addressed it, you might have a very different experience in terms of getting into colleges and schools. So I had a student who in her freshman year she actually became one of my advisees, and said, well, yeah, I really didn't intend to do that. I planned on going to NYU School of Tisch to School of the Arts, because I wanted to be a musical theater actress. And I said, well, why didn't you do that? And she said exactly that her guidance counselor said, well, Hispanic women are generally not welcome on Broadway, or they do not become musical theater actresses. And of course, I had to point out Rita Moreno and a number of other actors, and of course, the gentleman who created Hamilton, right? There are tons of musical theater actresses that he's given work to who were people of color. Lin-Manuel Miranda, that's what I was trying to think of. So I will say that I think it's important to, and that's easier for me to say because I'm a faculty member who is open to a student saying to me, I think you're wrong about this, or I'd like to really challenge your thinking on this. And at that time, you were not in a position to do so. But I will say to you, respectfully challenge it. And if you cannot do it face-to-face in that moment, be sure to write a nice long letter or email that documents exactly how you're feeling and what it did to you, right? And again, it should always be focused on what it's doing to you, not on, well, you did this or you did that. It's, this is how you made me feel, because that's going to be incredibly important. They should recognize when they've offended. And that goes for every professional, because that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to be better people. I hope that's helpful.
It was, thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, and we'll take our last panelist question from Abnerline.
Hi, Vida. My question for you, my question now for you is, as a young woman in high school going on to college, and when encountering microaggressions, sometimes I find myself either trying to give the person the benefit of the doubt that that wasn't a microaggression and maybe they misspoke. And so I get home and I realize that definitely was. And then I feel like I miss my chance to, speak up and tell that person, hey, this is how you made me feel. Can you not ever do it again? And sometimes I can't really find that spot for me to just really identify it sometimes. And in that moment, I know you said it takes a time to process it, but what are some ways you can have, start conversations and, tell somebody like, hey, this offended me, in a way that they can also learn from it and hopefully not repeat those same mistakes?
That is a really good question, Abnerline. Because again, we are trying to do so much better. And again, sometimes we don't even recognize when we have been hurtful. And that goes for every one of us, regardless of what the conversation is. So I will say that it is important we all want to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, but if you recognize it when you get home as something that was so hurtful that it has to be addressed, it can always be addressed the next day under cooler head circumstances, right? So think deeply about what you want to say. If you want to write it down, that's great. I generally don't think texting a response to these sorts of things are helpful because though it could be easier for your generation because you could edit as much as possible and try to be as mindful and thoughtful when you write it. And if that works for you, that's fine too. But I generally find that it's a face-to-face conversation, or at least a voice conversation, because we want to, in many ways, monitor or just gauge how this person is feeling about what you've just said has been hurtful to you. But I do believe that it should be addressed in the same way that you talked about addressing it the first time around. And again, we're not ready for these because we don't see it coming. We also don't have the vocabulary for it. So think about it deeply, call them out on it because it's important. That's what we do. We must call folks out on those sorts of things because if they're not, they can certainly do this to somebody else without even recognizing that they've made a terrible mistake.
Thank you.
Thank you, Abnerline, for your question, and Vida for the response. So we are going to open it up for any audience Q&A. The audience members can use the Q&A function on the bottom nav bar. We'll take just a few questions, and you may ask a question either to Dr. Samuel or to one of our Gen Z panelists. And while we're just waiting for any questions to come in, I do just want to repeat that we do have resources available on our website. The link is in the chat bar. We actually had a very talented group of She Works interns this summer, including Abnerline, working on a racial justice roadmap, which will be live shortly, which is an interactive roadmap for young people to basically assess where they are kind of in that knowledge continuum from ignorance to solidarity, and it gives them access to resources and action steps for them to take. So at that point, let me see if we have any questions from the audience, and it doesn't look like we do. Is that right, Allison?
I don't see any on my end.
Okay. Well, I think it's because our unexpected keynote speaker, Dr. Samuel, and our panelists were so thorough. I do just want to mention also, Dr. Samuel, you had talked about the importance of representation in this whole conversation, and that is one of the reasons why we had invited Alexandra Terry on as one of the few prima Black African American ballet dancers, and she's got a powerful quote that I was going to read, which is that she often looks around the room in auditions and doesn't see anyone else there that looks like her, and so that's why she's so committed to kind of sharing her story with audiences like here at Live Girl. She has said that she thinks the ballet world needs to give every dancer a chance to work hard and prove herself no matter what she looks like. And I just think that is a very powerful quote that I wanted to share. So in closing, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today for our Listen, Learn, Act conversation series. Our next conversation will be on August 25th. It will be a Gen Z roundtable. And I think, invite a friend, because no matter your race, ethnicity, class, gender, age, sexual orientation, or background, everyone has much to gain by deepening their understanding of how we got to where we are. And we really do need to move beyond words to action, and that's what this series is all about. So we appreciate you joining us today. Thank you, Dr. Samuel, for jumping in, and we'll follow up with Alexandra and possibly reschedule something with her. But thanks again also to our very brilliant panelists. And we'll
Sherry, we actually just got a quick question for Dr. Samuel that I think would be great to end with.
Okay. Great. So Dr. Samuel, I'll read the question. It says, Dr. Samuel, how do you think a teacher should respond to microaggressions they hear in the hallways? What do you think would be the most effective and appropriate response? And that is a fantastic question.
That is a wonderful question. And I have to say, I've heard those things before. I've heard microaggressions in the hallway before. And I had a choice of either calling young men out on that in that moment, or pulling them aside, trying to find out who they are, sending them an email indicating that I heard this. But I straddle a very, just an interesting line in that I tend to not want to insult young people or embarrass them. I want to call them out on it, so I find ways of doing so, whether it's pulling them on a side or if I see them again, letting them know. But oftentimes, I am more likely to do so. I do it for both men and women, but I oftentimes hear those microaggressions coming from young men on campus. And I've probably, in the last year alone, have encountered that about half a dozen times. And it's always disturbing to hear it. I was lucky that one of those students was actually in my class, so I was able to have a conversation after the class. But I think it is appropriate to respond whenever I could without hurting that student's feelings. And let me just also say that I've encountered microaggressions in faculty meetings, and that was a harder discussion to have because I had to follow up with an email to my colleague indicating that whatever she said was inappropriate. So I do believe it is important to respond. I don't think it has to be a response in that moment because sometimes, again, we don't have the vocabulary and we're trying to gauge exactly what just happened.
Thank you. Thank you for that question and thank you for that response. And so with that, let's keep the conversation going. Please join us on August 25th and we'll sign off for now. Thanks, everyone.